He was not born in a palace, nor among silken fabrics. He did not inherit an aristocratic surname or a family fortune. Giorgio Armani came into the world in an Italy scarred by war, where hunger and the wail of air raid sirens were the soundtrack of childhood. And yet, out of that darkness emerged a man who would forever change the meaning of elegance. How is it possible that someone who never studied fashion, who once dreamed of becoming a doctor, who even served as a soldier, would end up as the architect of the most coveted style on the planet? The answer lies in his gaze, a distinct, almost obsessive vision of beauty. Armani did not create clothes. He created invisible armor that allowed men and women to feel invincible. In the 1,980 seconds, while the world surrendered to excess, he preached the religion of minimalism. While other designers chased colors and ornaments, Armani stripped the suit down to its purest essence. And with a single gesture, the power suit, he transformed the way Hollywood, Wall Street, and high society wanted to present themselves to the world. But behind the billion-dollar empire, the glamour of red carpets, and the fragrance that bears his name, there lies a more complex story. The solitude of a man who sacrificed everything for his vision, the unhealed wound of losing his life partner, and the eternal question that haunts him: is an empire worth it if the price is one's own intimacy? This is the journey of Giorgio Armani, the child of war who became the king of sobriety, a man who turned less is more into not just an aesthetic, but a way to conquer the world. Giorgio Armani was born on the 11th of July, 1934, in Piacenza, a quiet city in northern Italy. But the serenity of his birthplace was quickly shattered by the winds of war. His childhood unfolded under the shadow of World War II, where scarcity, fear, and destruction defined everyday life. Instead of toys and laughter, Giorgio's early years were marked by the sound of sirens and the cold grip of uncertainty. His family was modest. His father worked in a warehouse. His mother cared for the children. There was no luxury in the Armani household, only the essentials needed to survive. Yet it was within that austerity that Giorgio developed his unique sensibility. He learned to see beauty in what was simple, to notice how a single detail could transform an entire atmosphere. Without realizing it, the boy was cultivating the very instinct that would later revolutionize fashion. The streets of Piacenza during wartime were both playground and battlefield. Children like Giorgio played among ruins, weaving games between collapsed walls while avoiding the threat of soldiers. War didn't only destroy buildings, it forged characters. Armani carried from those years a profound discipline, a yearning for order, a search for harmony amidst chaos. Those values, born in tragedy, became the backbone of his minimalist philosophy. There was, however, a refuge from the devastation: the cinema. As a teenager, Armani would escape into darkened theaters where black and white images offered glimpses of impossible worlds, actors in perfectly tailored suits, actresses glowing with untouchable elegance. The contrast between the poverty of his reality and the glamour on screen struck him deeply. While Italy struggled to rebuild from ashes, Giorgio began to dream of a world where aesthetics could redeem existence itself. That war-forged childhood shaped a young man unlike any other. Armani was not the rebellious bohemian chasing artistic inspiration. He was quiet, observant, disciplined. Hunger and fear had trained him to endure, and endurance became his silent weapon. The war eventually ended, but it left invisible scars. Italy entered an era of reconstruction, and young men like Giorgio faced the inevitable question: what to do with their lives in a wounded nation? Most chose stable paths, respectable professions. Guided by his mother, Armani enrolled in medical school at the University of Milan. It seemed logical: become a doctor, help others, secure a future. But destiny had a different plan. That early detour from a child of war to a would-be doctor was not a mistake. It was one more step in the strange labyrinth that would eventually lead Giorgio Armani to redefine elegance for the entire world. When Giorgio Armani finished high school, his path seemed set: medicine. Encouraged by his mother, he enrolled at the University of Milan to study medicine, a career that promised stability, prestige, and a secure future in a nation still recovering from the ruins of war. Armani accepted, more out of respect and obedience than true passion. But soon, he realized medicine was not his calling. Hours spent in anatomy lectures, studying organs and bones, left him cold. His heart did not beat in rhythm with science. The war had trained his eyes to linger on the surface of things, the texture of uniforms, the fall of fabric, the elegance hidden even in austerity. His destiny was not in the scalpel, but in the gaze. That unfinished journey was abruptly interrupted when he was drafted into the military. Armani served in Verona, assigned to a military hospital. There, amid the rigors of military life, he learned something far more lasting than medicine: the importance of order, sobriety, and precision. Every neatly folded uniform, every row of soldiers standing in perfect alignment, nurtured his aesthetic instinct. What others saw as routine discipline, Armani absorbed as lessons in style. When his service ended, he returned to Milan without a medical degree and without clear direction. He needed work, and he found it at La Rinascente, one of Italy's most prestigious department stores. At first, his job was modest: dressing mannequins, arranging displays, organizing windows. But what seemed ordinary turned into a secret university. At La Rinascente, Armani discovered the modern theater of commerce. Imported fabrics from France and England, colors that whispered of distant lands, mannequins that offered passers-by a promise of transformation, all these things awakened him. He realized that fashion was not merely clothing, it was a language of aspiration, a mirror of desire, a way of altering how people moved, spoke, and carried themselves. He spent hours observing customers. He noticed how a cut could make a man feel powerful, how a color could lift a woman's spirits, how the right garment could change a person's entire presence. For Armani, it was a revelation. Fashion was not superficial, it was psychological armor. Meanwhile, his wartime upbringing and military discipline had left him with an instinct for simplicity. While others admired the most ornate garments, Armani gravitated toward the essential. He began to sense that true elegance was not in excess, but in restraint. This intuition would one day become his revolution: minimalism. La Rinascente was his real education. There were no diplomas, but there were lessons about textiles, about design, about human behavior. He met suppliers, designers, and buyers, expanding his understanding of the vast machinery of fashion. The young man who had once wanted to save lives with a scalpel was unknowingly preparing to shape identities with needle and thread. What seemed like detours, medicine, the army, a department store job, were in fact the stepping stones toward destiny. Giorgio Armani was not drifting aimlessly. He was gathering the fragments of a vision that, soon, would change the world of fashion forever. The 1,960 seconds became the hinge of destiny. After years at La Rinascente, Giorgio Armani had sharpened his eye for fabric, cuts, and above all for understanding people. That rare ability did not go unnoticed. Soon, it caught the attention of Nino Cerruti, heir to the historic textile house Cerruti 1881, who was searching for fresh talent to revitalize his brand. Cerruti offered Armani a position as a menswear designer. It was an immense leap, from arranging shop windows to sketching garments that would define a generation. Armani accepted. Though cautiously, he had no formal training in fashion, only instinct and discipline. Yet it was precisely that raw instinct, unshaped by tradition, that would set him apart. At Cerruti 1881, Armani entered the atelier like a student facing a new universe. For the first time, he confronted the challenge of turning fabric into silhouettes, of drawing a line on paper and seeing it come alive on a mannequin. It was there that he refined his obsession with natural drape, with comfort, with clothes that liberated the body instead of imprisoning it. While most designers still imposed rigid structures, Armani sought freedom. Beyond technical training, Cerruti gave him something equally vital: access to the larger ecosystem of fashion. Photographers, models, stylists, international buyers. Armani began to understand that fashion was not just creation, but also communication, a theater where image and vision were as important as fabric and cut. And then, in that whirlwind, he met Sergio Gagliotti. An architect by profession, charismatic and intuitive, Gagliotti quickly became more than a friend. He was Giorgio's partner in life and the mirror of his ambitions. Where Armani was reserved, Sergio was bold. Where Armani doubted, Sergio pushed forward. He saw in Giorgio not only a promising designer but a potential icon. It was Gagliotti who planted the daring idea: Why not build your own brand? Armani hesitated. He lacked the resources, the network, the certainty, but Sergio had conviction. Together, they took the leap. In 1975, Giorgio Armani SPA was born. With modest funds but an unshakable vision, Armani and Gagliotti set out to challenge the titans of European fashion. They weren't trying to imitate French opulence or British tradition. They wanted to define something new: Italian sobriety, elevated to art. That same year, Armani launched his first men's collection, followed shortly by women's wear. It was a revelation. His suits were softer, unlined, unstructured. For men, they meant liberation without loss of elegance. For women, they offered empowerment without the sacrifice of femininity. His designs spoke a new language: quiet, confident, timeless. The critics were intrigued, the public captivated. Armani was no longer just a surname, it was becoming a symbol. What began as sketches in the shadows of Cerruti now stood on the threshold of a global phenomenon. It was extraordinary. The man who had once studied medicine, who had folded uniforms in the army, who had arranged displays in a department store, was now redefining an industry. With Sergio Gagliotti by his side, Armani was not simply building a brand, he was building a myth. 1975 marked the birth of more than a company. It marked the beginning of a legend. And soon, the world would know the name Giorgio Armani. The 1,980 seconds were an explosion of excess: neon lights, oversized shoulder pads, extravagant makeup, and wealth flaunted without restraint. In the middle of that noisy spectacle, Giorgio Armani did something radical, he whispered. And that whisper became the most powerful echo of the decade. His secret weapon was the power suit, the garment that forever changed how modern men and women dressed. Armani took the traditional suit, the rigid uniform that had dominated menswear for centuries, and dismantled it. He softened the shoulders, removed unnecessary linings, and allowed fabric to fall naturally. The result was a suit that was light, fluid, and elegant, transmitting power without shouting. For men, it redefined masculinity: less aggressive, more refined. For women, it was nothing short of a revolution. The Armani power suit offered not only comfort but also authority. In an era when more women were rising into corporate and political spaces, Armani gave them a uniform of power that did not mimic men's attire but reinvented it. Wearing Armani was not just fashion, it was a declaration. Hollywood became the perfect stage. In 1980, American Gigolo burst onto the screen with Richard Gere in a wardrobe of Armani suits. Gere's effortless sensuality in those garments didn't just launch his career, it catapulted Armani into the American consciousness. Suddenly, the Italian designer was not just dressing men, he was defining what desire and power looked like. From then on, Armani dominated red carpets. Al Pacino, Diane Keaton, Jodie Foster, and a young Julia Roberts all wore his creations. At the Oscars, at the Golden Globes, on the world's most prestigious stages, Armani became the silent architect of glamour. But beyond Hollywood, the power suit seeped into boardrooms and law firms. Wall Street executives, lawyers, and politicians embraced Armani as a badge of status. To wear Armani was to speak a language of confidence. I don't need ornaments to prove my power, my presence is enough. While his contemporaries competed to shock the Paris runways with exuberance, Armani conquered the planet with sobriety. In a decade obsessed with opulence, the boy who had grown up in war-torn Italy proved that less is more was not a limitation, but a throne. The power suit was more than a garment. It was a cultural shift. Armani didn't just design clothes, he gave the world a new definition of elegance, one that still endures today. The 1,980 seconds belonged to Armani, and with the power suit, he transformed from a promising designer into a living legend. If the 1,980 seconds consecrated the power suit, it was Hollywood that transformed Giorgio Armani into a god of fashion. In an era when cinema dictated global aspirations, Armani understood that dressing the stars was not just publicity, it was history in the making. It all began with American Gigolo, 1980. Richard Gere's silhouette in Armani suits didn't simply redefine the modern leading man, it etched Armani's name into American culture. For the first time, Fashion itself became a protagonist on screen, and Armani, with his meticulous eye for detail, had orchestrated the moment. From then on, Armani was Hollywood's chosen ally. He dressed Al Pacino, Leonardo DiCaprio, Michelle Pfeiffer, Jodie Foster, and a young Tom Cruise. The red carpets of the Oscars and Golden Globes shimmered with his creations, each appearance reinforcing the idea that Armani didn't just make clothing, he built myths. By the 1,990 seconds, his name was synonymous with global success. But Armani wasn't content with the runway alone. With an entrepreneurial vision rare among designers of his generation, he began to diversify. Armani Jeans, Emporio Armani, Armani Exchange, each line aimed at different markets, yet all carried the same DNA: sobriety, elegance, modernity. Then came the perfumes. Scents like Acqua di Gio didn't just sell, they became icons, among the best-selling fragrances of all time. Sunglasses, watches, accessories. Armani understood that fashion was no longer confined to fabric. It had to become a lifestyle. His ambition stretched even further. The architecture of luxury. Armani-branded hotels, restaurants, and residences emerged from Dubai to Tokyo, offering not just clothes but environments shaped by his minimalist vision. Few designers had dared to expand so widely. Armani was no longer only a creator, he was a global empire builder. What made him unique, however, was coherence. Despite diversification, every Armani product carried the same language: clean lines, muted tones, timeless elegance. Whether a perfume bottle or a five-star hotel lobby, Armani's DNA was unmistakable. Hollywood remained his perfect stage. Julia Roberts, in a vintage Armani gown at the 2001 Oscars, became an unforgettable moment. Beyoncé, Kate Blanchett, George Clooney at one time or another, all turned to Armani when they needed to embody sophistication. Little by little, his surname ceased to be just a label. It became a universal symbol of elegance. The boy who once ran through bombed-out streets in Piacenza had risen to become the undisputed king of modern luxury. Armani had conquered not only fashion but also popular culture, business, and the collective imagination. His empire had no borders. Armani's success was not confined to the runway or the red carpet. With a rare entrepreneurial instinct, he built an empire that transformed him into one of the richest men in the fashion world. For decades, Forbes estimated his personal fortune at over $8 billion, making him one of the few designers who not only defined trends, but also became a self-made billionaire. He was a pioneer in understanding that a designer had to be a strategist as well as an artist. While others sold their houses to conglomerates like LVMH or Kering, Armani clung fiercely to independence. "I'd rather see Armani die with me than in the wrong hands," he once declared. That stubbornness made him the last emperor of a fashion empire, still entirely under its founder's control. Diversification was his weapon. Beyond clothing, Armani expanded into perfumes, eyewear, furniture, restaurants, and even luxury hotels. Each product, each extension of the brand, reinforced the same universe of sobriety and elegance. Armani wasn't simply selling garments, he was selling a lifestyle, a promise of refinement. Yet the price of this success was steep. Behind the empire and the glamour, Armani led a private, almost monastic life. He never married, never had children, and kept a small, tightly guarded circle. He spent endless nights at his studio, poring over fabrics and sketches, driven by an obsession with perfection. For the public, he was an emperor of luxury. In reality, he was often a solitary man in a Milanese penthouse. The deepest wound was the loss of Sergio Gagliotti, his partner in both life and business, who died in 1985. From that moment on, Armani threw himself entirely into work, as if transforming grief into discipline. Those who knew him described a man demanding, exacting, relentless, someone who expected as much from others as from himself. That intensity gave him an aura of myth. Armani became a figure seemingly beyond the reach of ordinary human frailty. The man who had sacrificed everything for fashion. His office was his home, his collections, his family, the runway, his only celebration. This contradiction, the creator of a universe of luxury, who lived his own life with austerity and solitude, only deepened his mystery. Armani was the man who sold dreams, but went to sleep alone. In 1985, Just as the Armani empire was beginning to expand globally, the designer's life was struck by a devastating blow: the death of Sergio Gagliotti, an architect by profession, a natural businessman, and Giorgio's life companion. Gagliotti was not merely a partner, he was Armani's other half. The force that pushed him to risk, to dream, to dare. It was Sergio who had convinced Armani to abandon the safety of designing for others and to establish his own brand in 1975. He was the strategist, the negotiator, the one who handled investors and contracts while Armani focused on aesthetics. Together, they were unstoppable. The visionary and the executor, the artist and the architect. But in January 1985, Gagliotti died of AIDS at a time when the disease was shrouded in fear, stigma, and silence. For Armani, it was not just a personal tragedy, it was an earthquake. He lost not only his business partner, but also the man who had shared his intimacy, his confidences, his life. Reserved by nature, Armani became even more private. He never spoke publicly about their relationship, partly because of the conservative atmosphere of the time, and partly because the wound was too deep to expose. But those close to him knew that Gagliotti's absence left a void that could never be filled. Instead of collapsing, Armani reacted in the only way he knew: with work. He immersed himself in design, in expansion, in overseeing every detail of the company. The grief was transmuted into discipline. Each suit, each collection, became a way of keeping Sergio's presence alive in silence. Yet the emptiness persisted. Colleagues recalled how Armani spent long nights alone in his studio, examining fabrics under the lamplight, as if the solitude were the only space where he could continue his dialogue with Sergio. His decisions grew even more cautious, his control more absolute. After losing Gagliotti, no one else would ever occupy that place in business or in his heart. The paradox was striking. The man who clothed the world's most glamorous figures carried within him a wound invisible to the public. Armani had gained the world, but he had lost his companion. From that moment on, every Armani runway, every fragrance, every new boutique bore the invisible mark of Gagliotti. The empire was no longer Giorgio's alone, it was a shared legacy, even if only one of them was left to carry it forward. In a world intoxicated with ostentation, Giorgio Armani chose the opposite path. While other designers dazzled with extravagance, bold colors, and exaggerated silhouettes, he elevated sobriety into a creed. His unspoken motto was simple: less is more. Armani's minimalism was not a passing aesthetic, but a philosophy of life, deeply rooted in his personal history. Having been born into poverty and raised amid the ruins of war, he knew that essentials were enough. For him, true elegance did not require excess. It was the harmony of form, function, and proportion. His suits did not shout, his dresses did not depend on sequins or flamboyant details. They were silent pieces, almost invisible, yet they carried an undeniable power. They transformed the way people felt within them. That was Armani's genius. He was not designing for display, he was creating invisible confidence, garments that allowed men and women to carry themselves with authority. This vision redefined the very concept of luxury. Armani challenged the notion that luxury had to be loud. His collections proved that a shade of gray could be more striking than a loud red, that a clean line could convey more presence than layers of ornamentation. Simplicity, in his hands, became the purest sophistication. Over time, his minimalism transcended clothing. It became the language of the entire Armani universe. Perfume bottles with clean geometric shapes, boutiques with sleek architectural lines, hotels where every space breathed serenity. Even his advertising campaigns reflected this coherence: black and white portraits, intense gazes, nothing superfluous. The impact spread beyond fashion. Filmmakers, architects, and interior designers took inspiration from Armani's aesthetic. He turned minimalism into a cultural movement, one that celebrated essence over excess. This consistency gave Armani a unique place in history. While trends shifted restlessly, he remained unwavering, and that fidelity to his vision allowed him to transcend decades without losing relevance, embodying timelessness itself. In truth, Armani's minimalism was a mirror of the man himself, reserved, disciplined, austere. A man who never sought to be the center of attention but allowed his work to speak with quiet power. In an industry often defined by noise, Giorgio Armani built an empire out of silence. As the decades passed, while most great fashion houses fell into the hands of conglomerates like LVMH or Kering, Giorgio Armani resisted. He did not sell. He did not surrender. He held on to independence with iron determination. His empire remained entirely under his control, run from Milan like a personal kingdom shaped by his singular vision. It was for this reason that many began to call him the last king of fashion. The title was no exaggeration. Armani was the last of a generation of designers who not only created but ruled. His company was a reflection of his character, austere, precise, disciplined. While others indulged in the whims of fame, Armani remained faithful to his mantra: elegance, sobriety, coherence. His legacy cannot be measured merely in the garments he designed, but in the way he changed the relationship between fashion and society. Armani made the suit more than stitched fabric. He transformed it into a symbol of power. He redefined how the world viewed authority, femininity, and masculinity. He transformed Hollywood, corporate boardrooms, runways, and even the everyday lives of millions. He also left a business legacy. In an industry often torn between creativity and commerce, Armani proved that it was possible to be both artist and entrepreneur. He built a brand worth billions without betraying its essence. Armani was not just a name, it became a cultural institution. When he passed away on the 4th of September 2025, the world mourned not only a designer, but a cultural icon whose influence transcended generations. Actors, leaders, models, and millions of admirers acknowledged that with his death, a chapter of fashion history had closed. The inevitable question lingered: would there ever be another like him, capable of resisting time, market forces, and the temptation to sell out? The answer lay in his enduring legacy. Giorgio Armani demonstrated that true greatness is not measured by noise, but by permanence. His minimalist style continues to inspire designers, architects, and artists across the globe. His hotels, fragrances, and collections remain constant reminders that luxury does not need to exaggerate, it only needs to endure. In a universe where fashion reinvents itself every season, Armani created something eternal. That is why he will be remembered, not only as a designer, but as the last king of a self-made empire that began with nothing and grew into one of the greatest in history. Giorgio Armani died on the 4th of September 2025 in his home in Milan at the age of 91. With him, one of the last great lights of independent fashion went out, and at the same time, a legend was born. The world lost a designer, but gained a myth that will endure. His story is the perfect paradox. A man who built a multi-billion-dollar empire out of the austerity of a wartime childhood, yet paid for that triumph with solitude. Armani left no heirs. His only legacy was his work. Each suit, each fragrance, each space bearing his name are fragments of an inheritance that will outlive him. The empire came at a high price. The same discipline that took him to the top also isolated him. The obsession with perfection made him a man both admired and untouchable. Behind the world's most desired brand lived a human being scarred by loss, trained by war, and driven by resilience that refused to surrender. And yet, perhaps that is where Armani's true greatness lies, in proving that fashion is not frivolity but character, that design is not fabric but power, that true elegance does not require adornment but conviction. Armani did not merely dress bodies, he dressed identities. He gave executives confidence, stars, glamour, women authority, and men sophistication. He offered millions the belief that clothing could change destiny. Now, as the fashion world continues its endless chase of fleeting trends, Giorgio Armani's name is etched in stone, not just as a designer, but as the architect of a universal language: sobriety, elegance, timelessness. The child who once played among ruins became the last king of fashion. And though he is gone, his reign endures in every runway, every red carpet, every fragrance, every line that bears his signature. Giorgio Armani was not just a man, he was a vision that changed forever the way the world understands elegance.